thank you all for checking out this week's episode. Once again, I'm John. If you like what you heard and saw today, subscribe to our YouTube channel, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and check out our brand new merch store with hats, coffee mugs, t-shirts, other cool stuff coming down the pipeline. Again, thank you all for support. Be safe, and see you next week. How's it going, everyone? John here, the host of Spirit Talk, and today we're welcoming BC Sanders to the show. BC is a veteran gang unit officer and an author for Skillset Magazine. And so before we get started, just so you're aware, you won't be seeing BC here because he's still active in his career with the gangs and homicide and stuff like that. So just as a precursor, that's why. But BC, it's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me on, buddy.
It's one of these things too. The episode I've got coming up with Marcus Torgerson. He's been on the show a bunch of times, but I did something with him that episode where I didn't have any notes. We had an idea in our head. We talked before, hey, let's cover these topics, and I'm gonna do the same thing today with BC, just because one, he's never been on the show, but I feel like with everything he's done or has continuously done through when I've got to know him, whether it's different podcasts with Jason Piccolo, the protagonist antagonist show they got going now, his writing in Skillset Magazine, and his work in law enforcement, specifically gangs, I feel I could just kind of put this together off the cuff, real, raw, refreshing. So again, BC, thank you for partaking in this.
Yeah, and you left out the 80s movies and 90s movies references.
Yeah, so for sure. I mean, we'll definitely be talking China O'Brien, Tiger Claws, and Over the Top. But yeah, so and I kind of want to jump in here because I want to start with the writing aspect, and then kind of go back into your career. But when it comes to the Skillset Magazine articles, you're right. A lot of the stuff is geared towards parts of history that are dirty, dangerous, that a lot of people don't understand the hardships people went through, whether it's the tunnel rats, and people like Bass Reeves, these characters that kind of get overlooked in the echelon of history. And so that type of writing for you, is it a therapeutic for you to talk about, understand, and learn, and kind of just do a deep dive on these individuals and different things? And how important is it for us as people to learn and understand the lives some of these men went through?
Yeah. So when I mean, basically for maybe the last 15 years, 20 years, I've just constantly been a reader. And I would find myself talking to people and saying, oh, have you read this book or that book? And sounding like a really, like a big nerd, but I realized that people were like, wow, I've never heard of the Churchill Club, and I'm like, oh, Churchill Club are these, Danish teenagers who, when the Nazis began occupying that region, they fought back, and they were basically like Wolverines of World War II. But when I started to talk to people about it and they don't know that history, then I would see like, oh, okay, they're really interested in it. So I just always kind of had it in the back of my mind about how great this like obscure amount of history is, and how if people knew it, maybe they would even be like, well, one, you don't want to repeat it, like repeat the mistakes of history, but you can also get motivated by it, right? I mean, you can look at it and go, hold on,
right?
You're talking about teenagers who were setting fire bombs in Nazi headquarters and stuff, and were breaking out of prison when they were arrested at like the age of 15. And they would escape prison at night and sabotage like artillery pieces and sneak back into prison. I mean, it's crazy stuff that Skillset was, when they came along, they offered me that chance, like, hey, write about the historical stuff. We call it like historical badasses, like the people who just went above and beyond. And so when you're reading a magazine like Skillset, you may read an article about like the first female Thunderbird pilot, you know what I mean? Or reading about, lucha libre, like wrestling and stuff. And then the next article could be Frank Hamer, who, tracked down Bonnie and Clyde. So it's just, it's such a variety that when I started pitching a lot of these ideas, I mean, I would literally send 3 or 4 pages of ideas, and so they were like, yeah, we like those, but let's go with this one or that one. So I think one issue I have maybe 4 articles in, and the rest of them I usually do like 1, maybe 2 articles. So it's like the one that's out right now. It should just be hitting shelves. Maybe within this week, most people should see it on the shelves, or get it in the mail through a subscription. But it's actually, I do an article about a unit in World War II that destroyed the Nazi program when they were trying to build the atomic bomb. They needed heavy water to do that. So these badasses parachuted in, survived the winter, and then snuck into the facility, blew up the room they needed to, and snuck out. They didn't destroy the whole facility because they didn't want to kill the local citizens. Anyway, stuff like that I nerd out on, but I think a lot of people like it.
And it's the thing I love about Skillset Magazine is that, unlike other magazines that are in that genre, like just magazines based on the nomenclature of a gun, or
right.
some of the stuff that's so tactical, it's only geared towards that percent of people, or the very small percent of people that are that into guns. Not knocking those people, but those magazines, for someone like me that's handled a lot of firearms in the security world, I'm not interested in that. A magazine like Skillset, I want to learn about the tunnel rats. I want to learn about bath threes, but I also want to have very fun tongue-in-cheek articles with people that are actively in this field, whether it's gang-related, law enforcement, military, but they bring a sense of self-awareness where it's relatable to everyday people. Whether I remember there's an article, maybe it was when Marcus Torgerson was on the cover, but it was about home safety, what you could do on a low budget to protect your house. This is the start of the pandemic, and that's kind of how I got into Skillset, because I wanted to start reading stuff that was interesting and relatable to common people. And again, the Skillset and everyone over there, it's just, to be part of that's got to be pretty cool for you.
Yeah. So for me, when I started it, I was basically, the year I started it, I was doing some pretty, I guess we'll just say, stressful stuff at work, and working very high profile stuff with a gang and a unit. So it was great to be able to decompress and do that. And the creative side come out, that I've used the creative side in law enforcement for years to solve a lot of the gang problems, but to be able to do it and read and be around people like Marcus and Jason and Ben, the editors at Skillset at the time, and to see them start this magazine, almost like back when we were kids and people had fanzines. They were going to shows, like going to punk rock shows, because like Jason, one of the creators, he was a skateboard punk rock kid in the 80s, so we kind of clicked like that. And Ben's got the whole metal background, so it was like they were creating their own fanzine, but on a very high level of just high production, great photography. Like anybody that reads the magazine, they're always blown away. Like, damn, I didn't know magazines, they were still making them like that. Like you said, things got so cookie cutter, and I'm not knocking the other magazines. I love to shoot weapons. You give me a pistol, I'll go out there on the range and shoot all day, mag change, throw it in the dirt. I'll do one-arm drills, all that. I love all that, but I can do that with any pistol. I don't necessarily want to read an article about the latest Glock or whatever. It's just kind of like, that's a tool. I'm more interested in how it applies. So like when they've done articles, on places like Thunder Ranch or something, where you can go and get just this like high level training from really great instructors, and then be like, man, I want to go do that training, and then, like you said, flip the page and read, whatever 5 ways to do whatever, it's like funny articles in there, or don't Google that, or, so stuff like that it's just a good variety. And their digital content on the website, I'm more of a print kind of guy. Like I'm sitting in a room right now with 4.
I need to feel it.
Yeah. I've got 4, ceiling to wall or bookshelf full of books. I like the hard copy to feel. However, I'm always going to their website too, because people will ask me, hey, I want to read, your article on whatever, pick the topic, like, like I said, Bass Reeves earlier. So that issue was one of the early ones. It's out of print, but you can read it on their website. So you can go to their website and just scroll through, pages, and like 20, I think it's like 10 or 15 pages of art, all kinds of articles that they've digitized from the magazine. And I've even written some articles just for the website that were never in the magazine. So it's just cool, man. They've got a really cool thing going, and like you said, when you mentioned Marcus, so I had a chance to go out to SHOT Show in Las Vegas in 2020, like right in January, right before COVID and the first wave of lockdowns. And that's when I met Marcus in person. And so that was like the running joke was like we were getting lost at SHOT Show. We had no clue what we were doing or where we were going, you know. And I don't think we even talked about guns at all. It was like life and philosophy. And like one night we sat around at like this cigar bar, and he's banging like Red Bulls and I'm drinking water because neither one of us drink, you know. And we're just having a good time with like Ben and Jason and other people, man. We had a really, really good time. And for me, that is a decompressor. Like to be able to fly out there, do that, leave the gang world aside, leave all the homicide, the death, the negativity, get out there and meet people like Rick Takahashi, who's a professional surfer. He's plugged in with Skillset. You know, it's like meeting these people and going, this is what life's about. You know what I mean? Like I'm working hard, but this is my reward. I get to talk to people. Yeah.
One of the like last year during the pandemic, I was on tour with I believe this was Smith and Myers, the offshoot of Shinedown, and we had a day off in Arkansas, and they're still in the process of doing the U.S. Marshal Museum on the river there in Arkansas.
Oh, okay.
And so a bunch of us I reached out and said, hey, I'd love to do a tour. Like, can we I know it's not open yet. We went in there. They took us into the private vault, and we got to look at and touch Bass Reeves' actual rifles and guns and all that stuff. And so I was familiar with a person like that just because I love, like, I always had this fascination with, yes, John Wayne movies and Robert Mitchum and like all that Stagecoach and Rio Lobo and Sons of Katie Elder. But the real cowboys, specifically someone like Bass Reeves, who, if you're not familiar, is an African American, to do what he did and to hold his guns a part of history, it's like what he changed and how he changed perception of it. It was kind of surreal actually touching something that, and then to read articles about it, there's something very surreal to that part of history that not a lot of people understand. But I think once it gets out, whether it's articles from Skillset or just movie productions or shows, they're done really well on these certain characters. It's going to be amazing once people open their eyes and be like, man, these are real life heroes.
Yeah. So Isaiah Washington made made a Bass Reeves movie. And so he's on the cover of one of the issues that I did a Buffalo Soldiers article on. They did a really cool dynamic cover with him, you know, dressed as a cavalry soldier.
Yep.
But when you talk about history, like there's some of the source material from Bass Reeves that's really well written. You know, I learned that a third of U.S. Marshals at that time were actually African American. So it's a huge portion of the deputy marshals that were out there were African American. And it wasn't until just around the turn of the century that a lot of that changed, unfortunately. You know, and so you saw people like Bass Reeves who retired and then got hired on with some of the cities and started doing some city police work, you know. And then of course you got population shifts and stuff like that. But man, to go back and like read what they did and like the Buffalo Soldiers and how they would just ride for, you know, hundreds of miles on horseback, dude, in the freezing cold, you know, tracking down people. Like, and at one point, the Buffalo Soldiers were helping track down Billy the Kid. I mean, just crazy stuff, man. And then they go on to fight at San Juan Hill and stuff. But so when you're talking about museums and be able to go in there and see stuff and understand, you know, that there's this cycle that unfortunately in America, we don't seem to always break, or we don't seem to understand. Like a lot of people are kind of caught in this vibe right now that there's so much strife and just infighting between citizens when you want to say, look, this is what this country overcame. All the wrong stuff that the country was doing is somewhat corrected now. Like now is the time where we're supposed to show respect to everyone in the past, from civil rights marches to, you know, law enforcement officers who were protecting, you know, citizens who couldn't protect themselves, like all that stuff, to the military units, people, you know, who were doing dangerous things in World War I and II. And like now's the time where we're supposed to live a good life, treat one another right and respectfully, and be like, thank you for having that courage so that we can live peacefully with one another. And you know, that's not to get too philosophical, but it's that thing that I see day in and day out. Like if two people could just communicate a little bit better, maybe they wouldn't come to blows in the middle of the street, or it wouldn't come to gunplay, you know, and shooting each other. I don't know. I think with the perspective of history, that's how it can be applied for people to fully understand what would be.
Especially what's going on in Russia and Ukraine now, whether it's ego and whatever it is, but you mentioned if you could very easily repeat history within one
Yeah.
bomb or
Yeah.
one thing. It's the idea of people coming together and just talking. I think it's so vital, and we've kind of lost sight of that. I mean, obviously, two countries going to war is a bigger scale than say you and I having a disagreement and then talking 2 years later and being, hey, let's figure this out. But
Yeah.
it is the idea of history repeating itself. Well, you could go into any library or bookstore and just read about everything that's happening now or has happened because it already happened before and happening before that.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
where do we as humans step up to the plate and be like, you know what, let's end this and do something good for a change.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, how crazy would it be that when people say, "Hey, we're basically going to stand up and say, no, we're not going to do this." You may be in power and you may think that's what's going to happen, but just because you're in power doesn't mean we're going to do what you tell us. So you think about like in the '80s where it was like the height of the Cold War and it was Reagan and Gorbachev, and I remember as a kid like watching Red Dawn and just thinking like, "Oh my gosh, the Soviets are going to invade." Yeah. And then all of a sudden it kind of comes to a head where these two leaders begin to talk, so I would see the news at a very young age and say, oh, wow, they're not enemies. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's almost like propaganda where you think, oh, it's us versus them. And then all of a sudden you realize these two leaders are talking. And really that's all it takes is two people to sit down and talk and realize this is dumb. Like if this war kicks off or any war, really, human beings are dying. And at the end of the day, what is worth a human life? We're entering this era now where, like you just said, we're old enough and we know enough about history to know this is very familiar. And I don't like that. Like this is getting where we need to, I say I'm talking about as humanity. We need to realize we're doing the same mistakes over and over and over.
With your background, obviously in the current climate with law enforcement, and we don't really have to talk about the defundment and every issue that's happened the last couple of years, it seems magnified with law enforcement. But with everything going on in your life and with the gang related stuff, when the pandemic hit, did you notice an uptick in what you're dealing with? Or was it because for me, I look at it, I assumed, maybe I could be wrong, that when the pandemic hits and there's these laws and curfews and all this stuff, and you have to do this and do that, the good guys are the ones that kind of suffer here, right? The law-abiding citizens. The bad guys already don't care about closed borders or gun laws and stuff. Is this something you notice is an uptick or a trend in terms of your line of work?
Yeah. So when it first hit and the lockdowns went into effect and everybody was, I'm speaking generally, like everybody's kind of panicked, like, yes, what are we dealing with? Even the gang world, everything went on hold, like even, and when I'm talking about gang members, like we still work sources, we still have a lot of information, like day-to-day information. So when gang members are like, oh, talking to one another and be like, yeah, I'm not going to go out, and hang out. I'm not trying to get COVID. But then as everything started shifting, months later and people start getting more relaxed, the sad thing is with the whole defund, it was like the perfect storm. Defund the police.
Yes.
So the pendulum was swinging towards less or less proactive policing. So less units going out there, finding a gang member with a gun and actually intercepting that person. So a lot of that, we went from, and when I say law enforcement went from being really good at that and really moving forward and using techniques and strategies to stop violence a lot of times before it happens, to all of a sudden now nothing. And a lot of agencies were reporting traffic stops were down like 70%. Voluntary encounters were down. So you had officers who would normally, observe people every day hanging out at a corner store, and they would go, yep, I see the indicators. He's tapping his waist. He's blading his body. He's probably got a gun on him. And I already know that guy because I see him out here every day. He's a convicted felon. He's 5 Deuce Hoover Crip. So he's a gang member with a gun, shouldn't have the gun, and he's out in public with it. So he's probably going to be committing some kind of crime. I'm going to encounter him. You know what I mean? Like that, like officers were working like that. That was their goal, was to stop things like that, as opposed to worrying about being a news story or something. So when defund the police kind of movement kind of hit and the pendulum started swinging to less proactive policing, you started to see more brazen activities where gang members, instead of firing 1 or 2 shots or 3 or 4, they're doing mag dumps of like 30 rounds. And you're taking witness statements where they're like, yeah, the guy was standing in the middle of the street at like 2:00 in the afternoon, emptying a drum, on a rifle or whatever. Like, you've got 30 shell casings out in the street, where 3 or 4 or 5 years before that, you wouldn't have seen that type of behavior so brazen, like just out in the middle of the street, like it's the Wild Wild West. When gang members don't get encountered actively by police officers, then they start to do whatever they want to do, because there's not that constant reminder of, oh, I could get caught, or, oh, my last encounter, that officer told me he knew my whole chain of command, he knew my rank, he knew how long I'd been in the gang, he knew who my grandmother was. You know what I mean? Like, then they go, oh, wow, I don't need to be hanging out here with a gun, because if he knows all that, he knows my dirt. You know what I mean? It doesn't take long. A younger generation joins, and you've got guys that are like 16 right now who basically got brought into the gang during COVID. You know what I mean? So the only era of policing they know is like hands off. So we got some young, like wild guns out there that even higher ranking gang members are upset about. Like, I can't control this reckless dude, man. He's out here, robbing people, carrying a gun, yelling our set when he's shooting people, which now puts heat on us. That's the era we're in now. So if you're studying statistics and people go, oh, wow, why is all this violent crime spiking the way it is? That's exactly why. Because the current trend is to cut back on proactive encounters, cut back on gang units or drug units, and just kind of hold your ground and hope that you don't make a news story. And it's sad, because the number one people that are victims and are suffering from this are the same neighborhoods that have had gangs for the last 20, 30, 40 years, and nothing has changed for them. Only it's gotten 10 times more violent for them.
In terms of how in tune are these gangs when it comes to what's currently going on in the world? Like, whether it's something as simple as the rising their gas prices, like shortages of certain materials they need. How in tune are they and adaptive to what's going on in the world as stuff changes on the continuously? It's always changing, right?
Yeah.
And so are these gangs that, I assume the top level gangs that operate at a global level, or even a city or county, whatever they do, those are very in tune to what's going on, whether they can keep doing what they're doing if they want to lose money or break even. Like, how in tune are they to the ever-changing lifestyles around them that's happening in the world?
Yeah. So, and when I'm saying gangs, I'm talking like Bloods, Crips, from LA based, but have spread throughout the US. Latin Kings, Gangster Disciples, Vice Lords, out of Chicago, spread that type of gang. However, even in that world, Bloods and Crips are a little different, like the culture of them, than say Gangster Disciples. An officer can meet a Gangster Disciple, and that person could be, "How are you doing, officer? Nice day." Like they carry themselves, and they're conditioned to be more of like a businessman. Like, hey, show respect, make the organization. A lot of times they won't say gang; they'll say, make the organization look better. And some of them actually are trying to do the right thing. They just like to dabble in the drug world. Another gang, like say Gangster Killer Bloods or something, or G-Shine Bloods, they may like indoctrinate or condition their members straight violence, like no matter what. Like the second someone says something, pop off. If you got to cut them in the face. If you're going to shoot them, dump 10 rounds in them, so that everybody knows we're not the gang to mess with. So even within the gang world, it's very, once you start to work informants, you start to understand what are their goals. Some gangs don't necessarily have a goal, like you're saying. Like they have no clue what's going on in the world, they see their plot of land in the city and how can they hang on to it. And if their leadership, if the leader at that time for that set is a violent individual, or maybe has like antisocial personality disorder where they're incapable of feeling, guilt or anything like that, they may push that cycle of violence. Their rival gang could have a leader who is very charismatic, who is very business oriented, and who is like, listen, we're going to hold this area, or, we're going to whatever, recruit, we're going to expand, but we're also going to have some goals, to where we're all going to pull our money every month and we're going to put it in a lockbox, and we're going to have this money. And if you get arrested, I can put money on your books in jail, or I can help put, buy some formula for your kids or whatever. It's almost like more of a family ordinance. So even within the gangs, it starts to get very, like, you gotta look at almost like a sociologist looks at subcultures and goes, okay, hey, what's the difference between this gang and this gang? And then on top of that, who's the most violent gang, and that sort of thing. Then you have someone like Latin Kings who have mastered public affairs. So people can go on, people are listening, can just Google Latin Kings, election, or Latin Kings,
which is crazy.
Yeah. So I mean, and they started expanding through. Well, Latin Kings go all the way back to 1957 in Chicago, but as they expand and get older, and throughout the 70s have a huge population boom, where you have like Kingism, which is like their manifesto and everything. It's just like, it's got this whole aura about it. It expands and hits New York City and takes off in the 90s. And there's a lot of bloodshed because of very certain members who were violent, but they also rebranded and had members running for office. So you can even look at, like, when you Google it, you'll see articles and go, wow, like there are people who run for office as a Latin King member. They will wear a shirt that says Almighty Latin King and Queen. And they'll say, like, I'm an Inca and a Latin King in like the Corona tribe or whatever tribe, like whatever set. So it's crazy because they've realized, because it's, Chicago in origin, going all the way back to the days of Al Capone and the mobsters, and this whole idea of, we're going to be an organization that you will never want to cross. However, we want to win the hearts and minds of the people. And if they can get, political leaders, if they can get people in office, they can change policies. So if a gang member is on, say, city council, he or she can sway local decisions made, such as a police officer can no longer whatever, and limit proactive police work or traffic stops. You know what I mean? Like, so it's not a conspiracy theory. It is out there. It's there. There is proof that gang members have run for elections. So I think the idea for the public is just educate yourself, watch documentaries, read books, question everything. I've actually talked to a very intelligent person who explained to me what the Latin Kings were. And I had to explain, well, there is a facet of that. You are seeing that on the surface. However, this is what's going on behind closed doors. These are the federal investigations. Right. These are the murders. These are dismembering bodies. Like there's a lot of bad stuff going on. So if an organization truly cares about the people, stop the violence, stop being a gang, don't push drugs, don't shoot your rivals. Just focus on that stuff. It's a strange era where we're in right now, where gangs are completely mainstream. Look at the Super Bowl. I didn't watch the Super Bowl, but at a Super Bowl event, everybody's sending me clips like, check this out, like Snoop Dogg's in full, Crip color, and you got people out there. I think it's supposed to be sea walk, and I haven't watched the whole video. I don't know if it's a legit sea walk, but it's kind of like you're seeing this glorification of Cripology, or like it's okay to be a Crip, and a lot of guys in prison would tell you that's a really bad choice to make.
Now, I know you can't say where you work out of and stuff, but in terms of, you mentioned, there's hundreds of gangs, right, in the world, thousands. In terms of a given city, say, take a city like Chicago or Boston, New York, a prolific city, how many gangs are working through that city? Or is it one of those things where like each borough or each section has their own gang and they kind of just respect each other? Like, I picture someplace like LA or Chicago, just nonstop, all sorts of gangs always cut
Yeah.
through there.
Yeah. So, and the interesting thing is like when I'm teaching my courses, part of it is the history of gangs so that people can understand. It starts out as like, like Latin Kings start out with like 13 guys in Chicago banding together in 1957 or whatever. And now it's this nation and now transnational. Same thing in LA. So if you were to study gangs in LA, which would be a really good city to study, it is
Yep.
absolutely mind blowing how many gangs, how many of them are still very much blocked off. Like Grape Street is Grape Street Crips, like they're on Grape Street in the Watts area, Jordan Down projects or whatever. So you could see that as like the origin, the birthplace, but what a stronghold they have there. And then it's just like studying countries, does another gang start to encroach upon Grape Street's area, So for the South, and I say the South because I'm not going to speak specifically, but you can basically take everything from Virginia down to Florida, all the way out to say Texas, right? Look at all those southern states, and there's just this mass influx of people moving here. And when they move here, they bring that gang knowledge with them. So you can have people moving into Atlanta or Charlotte or any of these like big cities down in the South. And I use those cities because if you were to Google them, you would see documentaries based on very high profile cases out of those cities. Now, those cities can have, any city in the South can have anything from the Chicago-based gangs. So you can have Maniac Latin disciples, you can have Black disciples, you can have gangster disciples, you can have Latin Kings, Vice Lords, Four Corner Hustlers, Spanish Cobras. You can have, Chicago's got hundreds and hundreds of gangs. Same thing with LA. So you've got multiple blood sets, multiple Crip sets. Everybody's moving here. So either a gang member moves to the South and now can start their own set there and recruit people and build their own little pyramid scheme, basically. Or local people who grew up in that city go to, say, federal prison, right? So maybe like a 21-year-old gets in the drug world. His city's not really gang related, but he goes and does 7 years or 6 years in prison, federal prison. He may join the gang that's dominant in that federal prison, turn around and come right back to his city and be like, yeah, basically I've been 5 years. I got recruited in. I'm, Treetop Pyru now, and we're going to make this thing pop. Like all these guys I used to sell with, all y'all are going to be under me, and now we're going to be Treetop Pyru. And it's almost like it just kind of follows or spider webs out throughout the U.S. And then it spreads also in schools. So you can have in the South, you can have a high school that has almost every gang represented in the high school because kids are often getting bused from one neighborhood to another. So the schools will be, more diverse. So you can have kids from all over the city representing each gang in that school. And so if the school doesn't really address that problem and they allow the troublemakers to stay in the school, they just recruit, and they can bring in 5, 10, 15 kids. And now all of a sudden this school is like a hotbed for gang activity, where 5 years before that, they may not have had any problems.
I always wonder, and it's kind of funny because some of my favorite movies from the 80s, 90s, like Mark for Death with Seagal, he takes out the Jamaican posse, or Stallone and Cobra, the Street Gang. There's every movie from that genre seems like there's a gang, right? Whether it's in prison or the street. And I've always wondered if gangs, and we can maybe even go into Training Day, the street level gangs there, where it seems more grounded in truth and at least realistic in terms of the structure. If gangs are so in tune to, again, that idea that they're being portrayed on television shows like SVU or high-profile movies where they are never shown as good people, and obviously for reasons we get. But I'm always just curious. It's like, do they ever look at that and go, man, we should probably change the way we're perceived? Because you kind of alluded to the idea of the ones that maybe dress better or start putting people in office or trying to look like professional gang people. Do they look at that and be kind of like, man, we look like fools. We look like idiots.
Yeah. So a really good example is like the Gangland documentary series that History Channel put out.
Yes,
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I, since it's like when I'm working, I can talk to all types of gang members, and can ask the same questions you are. Like, it's funny because when you're working informants or you're working sources, you don't always just talk about work. You don't talk about just gang stuff or crimes. You end up talking about jobs, about family, as some gang members work, for a year or two, they may start to open up and tell you about, oh, my kids got this problem or that, they're stressed out. So I've asked them about like Gangland before and been like, what do you think of that? And they're always impressed that on Gangland, it's showing how violent the gang is, and how just, this guy's like shadowy figure and they're interviewing some gang member and he's like telling you how he's going to cut your head off and stuff. And so a lot of gang members were really impressed with that. I've never really heard any say like, man, I really hated how we were portrayed in whatever, probably, if truth be told, because most gang members want people to fear them or to just be like, look, don't test me kind of thing. Like I can't, and it is true. Like, gang members can't show a soft side usually until they've really established that I'm not the one you want to mess with. I'll blow smoke, but I can also hand out a Christmas present, and so gang members have done that before. But the interesting thing is, like you said, if I were writing a movie and I was wanting to explain to the audience what it's really like, you would actually see gang members who are crying, who are stressed out, who maybe have 5 different girlfriends with up to 10 kids, by 5 different women, and they're 23 years old. You know what I mean? Like completely.
Well, it's like they have to pay bills too, and it's like they're paying the same water bill you are, but the means of them paying it is obviously through illegal means. It just it's tough for me to wrap my head around that. Like, it's what they see what they're doing is the right way, where on your end of it, you're trying to stop that because you are the right way. It's like that when you guys meet in the middle, it's super fascinating.
Yeah. So, the nice thing is to have conversations. Like I've been doing this long enough to where when I was a beat officer, like a brand new rookie, I had gangs on my beat. So I've watched guys go from like 15 years old to 25 years old.
Wow.
So talking to them at 15, and because I've got almost like a photographic memory, oftentimes with names and faces and things, I can say, hey, check this. In 5 years, you and I are going to run across each other, but I'm probably going to be in a suit and I might be a homicide detective. And, you'd have moved up to say like the 3-star and you're holding rank and stuff. But now all of a sudden you're tied into a murder. We're going to be sitting at a table and you're going to want me to believe what you have to say, because somebody's going to get you jammed up in something that maybe you're not involved in. Maybe your prints are on a gun, or maybe you're in a car earlier and then someone does a shooting. So that's happened multiple times, but it's that idea of being able to sit down with another human being and talk about life and say things like, I have asked guys before, like, why don't you just go and get a job, check out from all the gang stuff, man, and just like you said, pay your bills. Now, the drawback is a lot of gang members will live a nomadic lifestyle where they will have 4 or 5 girlfriends and they can just plop down at any girl's house for a week or two and not have to pay the power bill, not have to pay the water bill, and then up and go hang out with another girl. And their car maybe is paid in cash, so they're not making a car payment. They may not even have insurance on the car, because why do they care? You know what I mean? So it's, when they don't have that stress, what ends up happening is the stress of interpersonal relationships, of a girl, stabbing him in the thigh with a steak knife. And now he's got to go to old girl's house down the street with an injury. And she knows, you went and saw so-and-so and she stabbed you, So talking to guys and like one of the things I teach, and I won't go into detail, but I teach templates, like psychological templates. So when a officer, or agent, or deputy encounters a gang member, they kind of understand every person is a little different and every gang member is a little different. But this gang member they're encountering may only be in the gang basically for the feeling of security. like, hey, I got good connects in here. I can make money. I got a little security. These guys are going to go to bat for me. So that person's, that you can talk to them. Then you run across a dude who, like I kind of mentioned earlier, who a psychologist would say, yeah, this person's like antisocial personality. Like they thrive on violence, or you're not going to be able to rationalize their actions and be like, oh, don't you feel bad about that? Because they're going to be like, nah,
Right.
like I like this. They're few and far between. I mean, most gang members are not just robots walking around wanting to kill people. It's like anything, people get drawn into the organization and they join it for one reason. And then quickly they realize, damn, this is basically the world's most violent pyramid scheme. I'm now being asked to do very violent things against some of the same guys I grew up with, or in the same neighborhood I grew up with. And why am I doing this? So those are the things that, like, I talk to gang members and say, why are you doing what you're doing? This is your life. This is no one else's life. This is your life and you're living it. So you have to ask yourself, how many years do you want to do in prison for the gang? And a lot of times guys are like, man, I'm not trying to lay down it for one day or one night. Like, well, then why are you doing what you're doing? The things that you are doing, you already know we're so good at what we do. We're going to catch you eventually, and you're going to have to lay down. You're going to have to do the maximum amount of time because there's no way to get around it, So that's where, like, a lot of times people will ask, why is it so important to know all this gang information? Because they get overwhelmed. It's like, if you know the ins and outs of that gang in your jurisdiction, when you talk to a gang member and you're trying to actually save them from a destructive life, they're not going to listen to you if you don't know the details of that organization. But if you can explain every facet of it, down to sometimes even, hey, at that last meeting, this happened, or I know you didn't have enough money at your last meeting because you didn't have enough dues. You were $5 short. They'll stop and be like, how is it you know all this? Like, because everybody else is talking. Everybody else wants out. Nobody wants to stay on a losing team. It's a matter of time, before it catches up with you. And so it may take 2 or 3 years or 4 years of that talk. And then sometimes gang members will be like, yeah, bro, I remember when we talked about that and you were right. Like, I can tell guys, like, the rank you're at now, this phase is going to happen next. Then the second phase is this, and the third phase is basically you're going to be ordered to do a hit, and you're going to have a gun. And if you don't do that hit, there's going to be some ramifications that you don't want. Why wait until that happens? When this next thing happens, get out now.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like find it. And I'm not going to talk about the exit strategies that we have shared, but there are ways to get out. And in some gangs, you can actually leave voluntarily. There's that old blood in, blood out thing that a lot of people, are like, oh my gosh, once you join a gang, it's forever. And some gangs are that way. I'm not saying all gangs are that way, but some of the current trend within the last 2 or 3 years, 4 years, is a gang allowing a disgruntled employee basically to leave the gang. And they call it, like, a lot of times, like with Bloods and Crips and stuff, they'll call it laying down your flag. So your bandana is like your flag, like your color. So it would be like, all right, so-and-so is going to lay their flag down. So the whole hierarchy knows that person is basically like retiring. He's leaving the set, he's leaving the gang. He doesn't hate us. We got no beef with him. He's got stuff going on in his own life. We're going to let him go, because I've actually listened to ranking gang members argue about this type of theory years ago when they didn't want to do that. Because each member means money. So if you're charging dues, if the gang's charging dues and you lose membership, the higher ranking members are losing their cut of the money, right? So they want to grow the gang fast so they can get all this money for their weekly dues or their monthly dues. So some of the, when I say smarter gangs, I mean like some of the ones who can adapt faster and will survive or outpace law enforcement are the ones who are really good at psychology or human behavior and realize that guy is not happy with the set. Let him go. Because if we keep him, he's going to cause problems within an organization. He's going to get everybody all pissed off, right? Or cause drama, and then we got to answer for it. Let's let him walk on down the street, right?
Right. you're very in tune with pop culture, whether it's talking about Point Break, Rambo 2, whatever it is, but also the dichotomy of the punk music upbringing and the music stuff. So in terms of like movies and music, was this something growing up that just became part of your life? Because for me, when I was doing that type of stuff, even when I'm in a stressful situation or need to kind of get away from it, I'll listen to music or watch my favorite movie and just recite the lines. And so for you in your line of work, how important is that kind of escape, whether through some various forms of entertainment to kind of clear your head before you move on to the next thing?
Yeah, it's so, man, I got into punk when I was like 10 years old. And I hung out with my
Crazy.
older brother, or older friends. And I started going to shows when I was 13. First stage dive, I was 13. So it was like, I was hooked at a very young age, but I had these older guys that would protect me and would drive me to the shows and stuff. So, but for me, it was being part of something. We were already kind of outcast because of the divorced families, and we all kind of
Right.
lived in the same area, and there was just drama going on, so that for me it was like, okay, this is kind of like my core group of people, and everybody looked after one another. Now we fought each other, but we also unfortunately got into a lot of fights at that time. But it was like that was something that just kind of resonated with me. It was music that was singing about, for me, a lot of it was like not doing drugs or not getting drunk or becoming the stereotype of a punk. So you had like the Sex Pistols. When people would say punk back then, it was like, oh, Sid Vicious with a bloody nose and
Yes.
shooting heroin.
Yeah. Iggy
Well,
Pop. Yeah.
yeah. So that was like that. That was when punk first started. But for me, it was mid '80s, and so that was that era of Dead Kennedys, Circle Jerks. For me, Minor Threat, and a lot of the East Coast and DC bands that were really, to me, just, it was like, damn, there's a message here, and it's almost like a philosophy of like, okay, well, let me get into this, and really what it told me was live a life that matters. Like you're not supposed to be shooting heroin and wasting your life. You've got to do something more important. And so for me, I always started looking at that and started to see how am I going to make money in a career, and put food on the table, because that's what everybody did. You just had to go to work. And then two, how can I make it where it matters to me? Like I'm doing something that matters. So I never
Right.
sang, or I was never in a band. I couldn't play any instruments. I did love art. I took 4 years in high school of art, but I knew that I didn't want to try to make art a career. So a lot of other stuff was going on, but I eventually got into the Army, and then through going through the Army, paid for college, and got me
Yep.
squared away to go to college and do a degree in psychology and then become a cop. But the whole point of being the cop was to do something for me that was different every day, and to where I felt like I was making things different. Like a lot of people, you'll hear the stereotype of, oh, the grizzled, senior cop who tells the rookie, like, I remember when I was all young and idealistic, I was going to change the world. It was like, for me, I was kind of smart enough to know I don't care about the rest of the world. I care about when I
Right.
graduate the academy, my plot of land, my beat. How am I going to make my beat better? That's all I care about. I don't even care about the rest of the
Right.
city. I want to know that a kid's not going to get shot at this corner store or this Section 8 housing. Like I just want peace. That's it. I just want it. When I come to work, I want to know that everybody's going to be cool with one another and nothing bad's going to happen. And in the meantime, if I end up writing tickets or take people to jail, that's one thing. But that was my main goal. And so when I saw gangs on my beat, which were very new to our area, even the senior officers and the detectives didn't really know a whole lot about it. So that was when I was like, okay, this is the number one threat I got on my beat. And because of that background in punk, that outcast kind of looking at society from the outside, is like, okay, I can kind of understand why these kids are doing this. Why
Yeah.
they fall in line with this. Like this is not a foreign concept to me. Like why these 10 guys hanging out here will protect one another. Like they'll go to blows with someone, and it's like, okay, we may fight 20 guys, but we're not going to let our buddies get beat up. Like that resonated. It made sense to me. So, and I was never judgy. I didn't like walk up to guys and and talk down to them, because I never saw in uniform, because I've been out of uniform for a long time. I've done detective work and things, but in uniform, I never wanted to be the RoboCop. I never wanted to walk up to someone and talk down, because I've had those encounters, and they do nothing but create enemies, and they actually will change a really good citizen's point of view. And then citizen will be like, wow, that cop was a jerk, like why does that cop think they're better than me or whatever? So I think early on, that's why the way I talk to people, guys that were early on gang members would answer questions that I had, because I took an interest and would even say, like, man, I don't want to pull up on the block and see you out here with your brains hanging out of your head, man, and your grandma screaming over you. Like, that was last week with your buddy. Like, why do I want to see that happen to you now? And so then, and guys would be like, man, I don't want that to happen either. And we could sit there and talk about, their best friend dying a week before, and here they are trying to fight back tears in public because there's an image they got to hold. And here I got to hold this image of, well, I can't be all hugging up on this guy because I'm in uniform and I'm trained to keep a distance, So it was almost like this invisible barrier between us, but we're also building rapport, and we're also talking like two humans and going, hey, you're caught in this cycle. Right. I check in every day and I want to make sure you're going to survive, and you're out here every day, but what choices are you making that's going to get you closer to the grave? You're standing out here feet planted every day. If your enemy comes by, they're very easy to shoot you, So those are the realities. And then you start to talk to people and you realize it's all kind of the same things. We're all kind of drawn into wanting to be part of something a little more than ourselves. And for some people, it ends up being gangs.
I remember growing up, and to kind of stay in the punk genre, where you growing up, you'd be like, oh, those punk, they listen to punk music, they're in a gang. Or it was this misconception where if you love punk music, you are aggressive, you're a fighter. And so until I got older and you start realizing, you look at even the crazy stuff. I remember watching the Stooges and stuff where he cut his face up and jump in the crowd, be shirtless. And then I really fell in love with punk music. I went through a divorce, and I never listened to punk music before, but the song Gotta Go by Agnostic Front, I just found it at the time I needed it, and I just fell in love with that genre of music. But even before that, I'm like, man, I don't get it, because these guys are all fighting and throwing each other off stage and punching each other. But then I start making friends in the music industry, and you go to these shows, you start talking like, man, they're picking each other up, they're patting each other back. They are all walks of life, every genre, every sex, every whatever it is, every religion in there, having a moment where for that set or that performance, they're all feeling the best they've ever felt. And for you, like, where was the moment for you where it's kind of like, as you transition into your gang work, where, because some people today are still think that people, if you like punk music or you go to these shows and throw each other around and slam dance and all this stuff, that you're a gangbanger. And how do you break that mold for people that don't understand it?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I've had conversations within the last year with people that I grew up with, and we kind of lost touch just because of life and all that, moving in different states. And they've heard me talk about gang stuff. And that was the question, was like, well, when you're talking about gangs and you're getting so hardcore about it, and, we were in a gang, or we were, and I was like, no. Like, I'm talking about gangs. Like gun-toting dudes that are committing crimes. Gang in that sense, like back then, was like a clique or just a little crew of kids that would band together and strengthen numbers. So it is interesting when you say that, because the first few years when I was in the police department, I didn't talk about punk rock. I didn't talk about going to shows and let anybody know. And it really wasn't until I started doing some plainclothes assignments where I would wear regular clothes and wear a goatee or whatever, grow a hair out, that people started saying, like, what is that t-shirt? Like what are Gorilla Biscuits, or Flogging Molly or whatever. It's like all these jokes started. But it was this idea of, like, I know what the impression is when someone said, like you said, when certain people, now if you get someone who's like 20 years old or 25 and you say punk, they think Green Day, or No Effects,
Offspring.
Offspring. So it's very different. So, but someone that's older, like you said, they revert back to Sex Pistols, the Stooges, or whatever. When you talk about Agnostic Front, New York hardcore for me was like when I was in high school. And man, I got into like Sick of It All, Agnostic Front, Bold, Youth of the Day, like
Madball.
oh yeah, Madball, yeah. And that was just before like H2O took off. H2O is like one of the greatest bands of all time. I tell people that all the time. But like when you're talking about going to shows, the shows are always energetic. Everybody's always, if someone falls down, you pick people up. Afterwards, you talk and hang out with the bands. And especially now, man, as the scene is still around and these bands have been playing for 25, 30 years,
Oof.
there's a current trend right now. And Toby Morris from H2O, the lead singer, talks about how they were playing shows in New York within the last year. Like once the kind of the COVID broke or the regulations broke, they were playing these shows and they were selling out. So, you know, they're all flying in to play the show or whatever. And they get there and they're like, man, this show sold out in like a week. And then they get there and there's only like a fourth of the crowd there. So they can't figure it out. They're like, how is it that we sold the show sold out so quickly, but there's only a few people here, so to speak, you know, like a fourth of them.
Yeah.
Well, there was some, and maybe it was part of the internet, people communicating, but the fans were buying tickets from all over. Like, so you could have a kid in Nebraska buying a ticket to the show in New York to support H2O, knowing they're never going to go to that show, but hoping that money gets in H2O's pocket. So it's just really cool that people still support the scene. I mean, hell, I went and saw Agnostic Front. I think it was 2019 before the lockdown, and they played with Slapshot. And I got to talk and hang out with Vinny Stigma like after the show. So something like that. And there's no like cop bashing and all this stuff. It was just kind of like, hey, we're all adults, man. And we're trying to keep the peace and we want to come to a show and we want to hang out. And like, for me, I always try to tell the bands how much it means to me and to let them know, look, and I can talk to them face to face and explain, hey, there's some stuff I've done in my background, police work, that has saved lives. And while I'm typing up notes from that, or while I'm going to work, I'm listening to your music. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like your music still matters. It still influences me. It still drives me to do things that matter. And that when we go work really big cases, sometimes I run across other punk rock cops or punk rock agents. Like I've met FBI agents who, on the surface, we can walk in and give a briefing to some of the highest ranking people in law enforcement. And then all of a sudden behind closed doors, we're like, man, do you remember, you know, this band or that band? Or like, you know, like remember 7 Seconds? Oh, they're so great. And people hear us talking and they're like, what language are y'all speaking? You know, but it's that idea, like you just said, of something like a band like Agnostic Front. It resonates with you. And there is something about going to shows. There's something about that connection. And we lost it, you know, during the lockdowns. And as I was talking to some bands and stuff like through Instagram, which makes it a great tool. And the bands are like, man, it's tough. You know, it's psychologically hard. You know, they're not doing what feels good to them, and what's rewarding is seeing an audience of people from 15 to 55, you know, sharing the floor and having fun. And it's never been about money. You know, none of these bands are like making millions of dollars. It's what they do because it's art, and it you know, it resonates with the fans, and it's still going. I mean, I could talk all day about it. But you get it, you understand. And I think there's something to be said too, that it's still around. Like there are still bands that are young, but they sound like it's 1988. You know what I mean? Or 1995 or whatever. They trap that sound, and they're just influenced by it, and it's great.
And to kind of circle back to what we said before, as history repeats itself, I think a lot of those punk bands specifically newer bands sound old because the same stuff's happening in the world again. Yeah. And it's their way of saying, it's their version of angst and anger, and we got to stop this. It's the whole thing it's just awesome. I just love it.
Yeah, I post usually, like, I don't post a whole lot in my feed as opposed to my story. Like usually I'll post in my story like old flyers, or I may post like a record or something, or try to support, you know, bands that are selling t-shirts. But I posted recently, maybe in my story about like a week ago, a band called Smoke or Fire out of Virginia. saw former members of a band called Avail that were pretty big in the punk scene throughout the 90s.
Yep.
But the Smoker Fire had an album called Speakeasy, and there's a song on there called Integrity. And the cool thing about Instagram, like you're posting the lyrics to the song so people can see it. The song is already 10 years old now. It came out 10 years ago, and it's talking about the news and how the news is pitting, these groups of people together and creating a lot of the drama. And it's like, what happened to news? That's why it's called Integrity. Obviously, it's like what,
Right.
and obviously I'm not a songwriter, but man, the lyrics, even when that record came out, I'm like, damn, they're hitting the nail on the head, and we're still dealing with that problem 10 years later. It's like you said, it's punk rock is always relevant, no matter what's going on. And I always joke that more of us, as we get older and more influential throughout the country, maybe we have an effect on changing things. I know, like locally, through training and stuff, our officers act a lot different than they would have 20 years ago, because we are teaching them, hey, we've been through this before. We've been on the receiving end of unprofessional police work. This is how you do it. This is how you can actually go after gangs and be very effective, but be professional and personal. Like, you don't have to let all that anger build up or whatever, but
Right.
it's that punk rock philosophy. And that's why I also try to share as much on Instagram as I can, because people will send me a message and be like, oh, I remember that band, and it's almost like you get to connect and go, yeah. And you tell stories about going to shows or whatever. It's great.
Before I let you go, I know something we always talk about is our love of 80s, 90s, that schlock, martial arts, action films.
Yeah.
If someone came up to you if they asked you, BC, give me the top 5 most over the top law enforcement action movies you've ever seen, what would be some of those movies?
Like over the top, like as in just cheesy?
Yeah.
Like way out there?
Just like cheesy, like this is not helping anyone's cause here.
Yeah. So one of them, we actually quote it quite a bit, is Above the Law, Steven Seagal.
Nico
pool hall
Piscotti. Yep. Oh.
Yeah.
Get him
like Bobby Lupo,
so
right?
good.
Like when he
it was Richie. Out for
Richie.
Justice. Yes.
Yeah, Out for Justice. That's it. Yeah. I knew it wasn't Above the Law.
Get
that
him.
was the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Get him
that
sticks. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the first one. Like, we always joke, like, man, when we were kids, we thought that's what cops did. You just walk in there by yourself, throw the badge down, and just like beat everybody up. Like, that's crazy.
Yes. This is a Chicago cop right here doing this. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that one was like so crazy. And you can tell too, like when people write those movies, there's like, okay, we're going to sell this Seagal image, or whatever. So, so that's one of them. God, what was it? I just made a comment. Stone Cold, I think it was. Which
Brad Bosworth.
Which actually, like, I don't want to.
It's a great movie.
I was gonna say, I don't want to bag on it. Like, that one was not actually that good. I was making a reference like what the 80s were like with the Bosworth, the haircut, and all that. But yeah, that one actually wasn't too bad. Gosh, what's another good one?
I think to the point where it's like Stallone when he did that whole thing from Cobra, Nighthawks, all those type of roles where it's Raw Deal, Arnold Schwarzenegger, where he's undercover with the FBI, taking out the mob at a construction site. It's just
when you say that about Nighthawks and Cobra. So Cobra, when I watched as a kid, I was absolutely terrified. And I was watching it I was like 10 years old or something, 12. I don't know. I was young, but
this is a real gag.
Yeah, man. I really believed like there were dudes in the city clanging these damn axes or whatever, and they were just going to cut everybody up. Mainly because I was listening to bands like Iron Maiden and Dio still, so it was like, there's this devil worship and craziness. But
yes,
but Nighthawks.
Do you think Nighthawks are a classic?
That actually, if you go back and I watched it a couple months ago, and man, it's still good. Like, that is very, very like realistic. Shows you kind of that idea that, man, New York is always ahead of the power curve.
Oh yeah.
because that movie was made, basically on the beginnings of the JTTF, sort of, that whole idea
Yep.
of terrorism, because people forget how bad things were in the 70s and 80s, especially like in Lebanon and Beirut, the stuff like with
Yep.
Hezbollah and how it was spreading. But yeah, so Nighthawks, man, I love that movie. And I tell people all the time, and they forget. I don't know why. It's like they'll love Stallone, but I'm like, how do you not know Nighthawks? Like, that's Billy
Yeah,
D
it's
and
one of the
Stallone, probably the greatest
yeah.
duo in that era. But
Do
definitely
you
better
think
than
a
Tango
movie?
and Cash.
And I will die on the sword for Tango and Cash. That prison scene is. I saw its watch. No. So, do you
Yeah.
think a movie like RoboCop could be put out there today, or is it too pro law enforcement in the sense of it's showcasing cops doing anything necessary to take out the bad guys? Like, I always
Yeah.
look at movies like that. I'm like, could you do this movie today? Or obviously, movies and music are products of the time they're in; they would get released.
Yeah.
But with the age of Hollywood remaking stuff and always redoing whatever,
Yeah.
I look at movies like that. It's like that had such a satirical look at society and at the time. But could you do that where you're showcasing a hero or a protagonist like you and Jason Piccolo talked about,
Right.
literally going balls to the wall and getting rid of every bad guy? Like I'm always just curious about that.
Yeah, I don't think it would nowadays. But you got to remember too, like, so when I'm thinking RoboCop, I'm thinking when I first watched it and I was a kid, like a young kid. And so it's almost like a superhero type movie. I wasn't
Yeah.
watching it like, oh, this is actually like this in real life will be a cop just smoking people left and right. I think because the trend for the last, 15, 20 years has been movies that are more realistic. You know what I mean? Like, oh, this is how it really is or whatever. So,
Yes.
I don't know. There's so much cop like hating and there's just this like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's always been there. I'm not saying that people haven't always hated cops, but it's so mainstream now to almost like where people are conditioned to immediately not like a cop or not like a cop movie in which the cop is trying to actually do good. So I don't know.
It
That
seems to
would be tough.
be Yeah, and it seems to be that the narrative for entertainment now, it's easier to put out content that's anti-cop or a really good character that's a dirty cop, right? As opposed
Yeah.
to let's just create a very vanilla or just a really good cop that has his issues at home with a family and maybe it's like you create a character that's believable yet you're sympathetic to what majority of law enforcement goes through, man or woman, as opposed to, oh yeah, this character's great because he's a dirty cop and he's killing all
Yeah.
this. It's just like,
Yeah.
why can't we have that good character out there too?
Yeah. So I'm several months from finishing my first novel to submit and try to get it published.
Oh, awesome.
I've got about 5 novels kind of outlined, and it's more like I'm a nerd when it comes to literature, but like the way William Faulkner's characters are all kind of intertwined,
Yes.
or like Tarantino's characters, kind of crossover.
Yes.
So that's kind of how these books are. Like some of the novels are completely different stories, but one character may cross over, from one book maybe set in the 60s, the other book set in 2010 or something. But that character, you get to see his criminal activity at, whatever. So 2 of the
Right.
books actually do deal with gangs and police work in a very real fiction type of idea. So if you were to read the book, you would take something away from it on your angle from, security work and your background. You would be like, yeah,
Right.
he's dead on the money. That's exactly how it is. A street cop will read it and go, yep, that's how we deal with stuff. That's the reality. We're not getting in shootouts all day like Starsky and Hutch, we're not sliding across cars, we're dealing with stuff day in and day out. And those books will also show how real gang work is when sources are developed and why they work and cooperate and how things work, to where even a gang member could read it and say, yep, like this dude knows what's up. Like this is legitimately how things are from their perspective. And a grandmother can read it who sadly maybe has lost her grandson to prison or to the grave. And she may say, yep, this character is exactly what I went through. And I've had those same types of conversations on jail phones, where my grandson's crying to me and stuff, and then the next phone call, he's giving an order to hit somebody. You know what I mean? Like the gears
Right.
switch like that. So eventually when I get that stuff out and published, it'll be a great conversation to have with people, to show them more of the humanity,
Right.
or more of the human side of it. Like, this is how we get better as a society at this. Don't draw a line and say us versus them. It's us versus it. We're dealing with an ideology, but it'll come through hopefully in the novels. And like you
That's
said,
awesome.
yeah.
Well, this has been a blast, BC. I know you're on Instagram and stuff like that, but if people want to check you out, definitely check out Skillset Magazine, both the print and the online. And check out your Instagram for some movie stills, some punk rock posters, and some really good. You always pose really engaging and thoughtful things. Where that's the best thing for me, social media, where you can get people engaged and talking healthy
Yeah.
about different aspects of their life. And so, again, thank you for all this.
Yeah. Hey, I appreciate it. And that's the only thing I'm on is Instagram. I've never had social media until I started Instagram. And I think my brain is better for it, but I do
Yes.
enjoy it. So if people have a gang question or a question about books or music or whatever, just shoot me a message. It's B.C.Sanders.
Awesome. Well, thank you, sir.
Man, thank you, buddy. I enjoyed it.
How's it going, everyone? John here, the host of Spear Talk. You might not know this, but before I record an episode, I like to break a sweat. And I do that using the Chop Fit. Over the course of the past year, the Chop Fit has allowed me to lose weight, tone up my body, and feel even more amazing about myself. A feeling that you should all feel about yourselves as well. If you use this code, SpearChop10, you get $10 off your order. Once again, use code SpearChop10 for $10 off your Chop Fit order. It'll change your life. Thank you.